Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev, and this video is going to be a EJS and ExpressJS masterclass, in the sense that the goal here is not necessarily to teach you so much about ExpressJS more than using EJS as your templating engine with Express, and just show you some really cool techniques and ways you can use it and cool stuff like that. So let's do it. Okay, so I'm going to create a whole new server file. So I already have so just to kind of set you guys up, this is the setup that I have for my recent Express Intro to Express video. So I already have a bunch of stuff in here. I already have Express installed. So you can see I have .env and Express installed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a whole new server file. So we'll call this like EJS server. And that's going to be where we do our work for today. Now what I do need to do is install EJS, because I do have, again, you saw I have Express installed, but I don't have EJS installed. So I'm going to just do that real quick. npm install EJS. Okay, and there we see EJS is installed. Cool. So we're going to work out this file, just set up a quick Express file or server. So again, we're going to import Express. Import Express. So we just do const Express equals require Express. Okay, and then we are going to create our application. Const app equals Express. We're going to have our area for all our routing, and then we're going to have our listener. Okay, so we're going to say app.listen. We'll listen on port 3000. And we're going to say that, hey, when this starts up, we're going to console.log server is listening on port 3000. Okay, perfect. So we have our basic, most minimal Express boilerplate set up. So what is EJS and what is it going to do for us? Okay, so we're just going to create a basic route. So app.get, this is going to be for our main route. Standard callback for Express, which is recres for request and response object. And what's going to happen is that there's a function that's built into the response object, okay? Res.render. Now what this function does, it does two things. It allows you to use a template engine. A template engine is a engine, or basically software. What it does, it's going to run a function that's going to take a file that's your template. It's going to read that file as a big string, and then it's going to parse that string looking for template syntax. Okay, you'll see the EJS template syntax in a second. And then what it does, it's going to fill in variables where necessary. Okay, think of it like Mad Libs, where you have like placeholders for stuff. Okay, so basically what we're saying, and then basically what it outputs is a finished HTML file, and then that's what we send to the end user who's making a request to that route. Okay. And then there's frameworks that you can use EJS with for static rendering, like 11D, but not the topic for this video. Okay. So essentially what I could do is I could say like a name of a file. Now by default, the way Express works is that it's going to look inside of a folder called views. Okay, so unless you really want to configure Express, which I'll show you how in a bit, by default, it's going to look inside of a folder called views. Okay, so we can create a file in there with any name. So we'll just call it, first.ejs. Now the name of the file matters is the extension. Okay, because again, just showing you how you can use Express without configuration. Again, by default, it's going to look at the folders view. And what it'll do is that if you don't specify anything else, it's going to look for a library whose name matches the file extension. So in this case, the file is called EJS. It's going to look for a library called EJS. Luckily, I have a library called EJS installed. So if you were to use handlebars, you'd want to call your files .handlebars files. If you used like nunjucks, you'd want to use .nunjucks files, whatever template engine you're using. Okay. So now what I can do is I can say here, when I'm rendering my response, so instead of me doing like a res.send where I'm sending text, or res.json where I'm sending JSON, what I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, I want to render a particular file. So I just put the name of the file. So we'll say first.ejs. And since I gave it since I gave it a relative path, I just gave it a file name, it's going to look for that file in the views folder. So it's going to say, hey, is there a file called first.ejs in this views folder? Cool. And it'll render that template. And then this EJS file can just be a straight up HTML file. Okay? So I can just put normal HTML that I'm used to putting in there, and that'll work just fine. Hello world. My page. Okay, so let me start this server up. So I'm going to say node EJS server.js. The server is listening on port 3000. So let's head over to the browser and go to localhost 3000. And you see the template is rendered. Okay, so what I'm going to do is that. Okay. So that's all well and good. So it's just HTML. So in that case, there's nothing that EJS has to interpret. Okay. But what if I wanted to put something in there that it did have to interpret? Okay, so for example, let's put a h2 in here. If you want to inject something, you would use this. You would first start off with this symbol, okay, and then you would close it off with this symbol, okay. So essentially, in between here is what you're going to inject onto the page. You can put any valid JavaScript expression here, okay. So I could do something like, 5 times 5. Okay, and 5 times 5 is going to equal 25. And watch what happens when I refresh the page. 25. Okay, so essentially what happens is that whenever you have these brackets, it's going to evaluate whatever's in the middle as JavaScript, evaluate it to a single value, and then this symbol means inject that value. Okay, so if I don't have this equal sign here, then it doesn't inject it. Okay, so it's the equal sign here that makes it actually inject the value, or inject the expression that's in here. Okay, cool. Okay, so that's essentially like the basic concept here. There's going to be that, and without the equal sign, you would use that for like logic. So for example, if I wanted to do like this, if 5 is greater than 3, okay, so the idea is that I want this to be treated as like JavaScript, but it's in the middle of my HTML. So you use the EJS templating syntax. You use like these little brackets here, opening and closing, to say, hey, this piece in here is treated like JavaScript. And then I'm going to make sure I put some brackets around this one too. So this and this are treated like JavaScript because they're inside those brackets. They're not printing anything to the screen because they're just logic. Okay, but what's going to happen is that the stuff in the middle can be like straight up like HTML. Oops, I see what I did there. Let me make sure I get that whole H2 here. So when we say 5 is greater than 3, okay, anything that's in between these curly brackets will show up if that's true. And 5 is greater than 3, so that should be true. So we're going to see 25. Now if I change that to 5 less than 3, 5 less than 3 is false. So that means anything in the curly brackets for this if statement will not show up, will not get rendered by the EJS engine. So it doesn't disappear. So the point being is that you can now use JavaScript logic when you're trying to express your HTML, okay, which allows you to do a lot of really cool things. Okay, you can do loops, you can do all sorts of really cool stuff. Okay, anything you can theoretically imagine. Okay, not only that, here when we do like res.render first.ejs, we can pass in a second argument, and we can pass an object with as many properties as we like. So let's try one. We'll say, hey, we'll have a property called test, and it'll just say hello world. Okay. Now when I render this file, all the variables that I bundle up in this object will become available to that template. So here, instead of writing hello world absolutely, what I can do is I can use my EJS, okay, and say test. That's the name of the variable. Okay, and if I refresh the page, it's still, oh wait, we got something. Test is not defined. Did I not call it test? Test. Hello world. It is called test. Test is not defined. Oh, I know why. Since I changed my JavaScript, I have to restart the server. Okay, and I forgot that I didn't put the watch, so I need to make sure I add this little watch flag. So that way the JavaScript reruns when I make changes. Okay, so we did that. Now we refresh the page, and it works. Okay, it still says hello world here. And still this doesn't show up because 5 is still not less than 3. But again, if I change that back to 5 greater than 3, 25. Okay, and this could be, you can inject it anywhere. So for example, I could say, hey, I can create another property here called like H1 class. And we can say light, in case you were trying to do like a light mode, dark mode. Okay. And then over here, I can do the H1 and say class equals, and then here in the quotation marks, I use EJS to inject the variable. Okay, actually, what's that? It was called H1 class. H1 class. Okay, and so then theoretically, that class would be there. And just to show you, if I refresh this page now, and then we open up DevTools, see it has a class of light. Okay, so you can use EJS to dynamically change the classes, so that way if you wanted to change like the way something is styled between different visits to the page based on certain factors, you can do that. Let's say here I wanted to deliver like an array, so we'll say R equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can loop over that, so I can say something like for, and you can use any kind of for loop you want. So you can use a standard for loop, a for each loop, whatever you're most comfortable with. So I can say, hey, for let item of R okay, and then I make sure I set my brackets up. So there we see that line's JavaScript. This line's JavaScript. Okay, and then in the middle, we can say, hey, we want to do on each loop. So we'll say on each loop, what I want to do is create an H3. And inside that H3 should be, using EJS, we'll inject the value of this item variable, because that item variable exists inside the loop, and then this line of code is inside the loop. Okay, so I can say, hey, put item here. And see, I've made an H3 for each number in the array because I looped over the array and created an H3 on each loop. Okay, so imagine you have like 50 items in an array and you wanted to create a card for each one. All you have to do is loop over, write the HTML once, and it can just loop over and generate the HTML for each card if you have an array of items. Okay, but essentially anything you can think of JavaScript-wise is possible. Other cool things you can do is that you can create other EJS files that you use inside your EJS files. Okay, so for example, these are called partials. Okay, so I can create a new file here called partial.ejs. Okay, and here we're going to say h1 I'm from the partial. Okay, and now in this file, what I can do is I can use that partial. So I can sit there and now, but for that I would use the dash symbol. Okay, so you're going to use this dash symbol when you do that. And you're going to use this include function. So you're going to say include, and then you have to pass in the file path. I forget if it's include or includes. We'll find out in a moment. And it should be just partial.ejs. And you see I'm from the partial. Okay, because essentially what it does is that this just reads that file and injects that text in here before it reads the first .ejs. So essentially the steps that happens is that when that res.render runs, it's first going to read the first .ejs, but then notice there's an include on there. So then it's going to read the partial.ejs and inject that in the text in the first, and then treat all of that as one big blotch of text when it interprets and parses it out for the EJS template syntax. So the cool thing is I can now refer to those variables here too. So I can sit here and be like, so any variables that were accessible in first are accessible here too. So I can be like, here we'll say h1 class. Okay, so h1 class. And then if I refresh, and you see like I'm able to use that value even though it's a separate file. Even though technically here I'm saying I'm going to render first.ejs, I can include other HTML files here, and they can refer to variables by the same name. Now again, if the variable doesn't exist, you will get an error. So you want to make sure that it does exist. But the cool thing is this allows you to create pieces you can reuse over and over again. For example, you know, I may want to like reuse this head tag. Okay, I don't necessarily want to have to write this up every time. So I can go create like a head.ejs. So I'll say like new file head.ejs. Okay, and then I can just set up my whole head tag here. You know, put a title in there. And then just expect that, hey, every page should be rendered with a title. Okay, but then I can, you know, link to a jQuery code.jQuery.com. So that way that's accessible for my, because again, all this HTML stuff, the final rendered HTML is front-end code. So there's my jQuery in case I want to use jQuery in any JavaScript. Okay, and now what I can do is go here in first and replace this head tag and say, you know, I don't want that. What I want is this. Okay, and now when I refresh, oops. Oh yeah, I have to include a title. I have to go back over here and include a title in the object. Title this page. So you can see the error is like right there. It's telling me, hey, this title variable that you refer to right here is not defined. Well, I gotta go make sure I define that in that object here. And it works. Cool. And then again, if I go over here to sources, I can see that, hey, look, there's jQuery. Okay, so that head tag is working. And just so you can see what the output is, technically here's what the browser is being sent. So notice you don't see any EJS in what the browser is receiving. All the browser is receiving is all the HTML after the rendering on the server. The server takes all that template syntax and turns it into actual HTML. So you can see here, and there's the H3 for the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4. That's what the browser sees because that's what your server sent it. Your server sends it the final result. Okay? So keep in mind that the server, the template code runs on your server, even though the HTML and anything associated with it runs on the browser. So, you know, there's like a thin line there between where are you operating in the back end relative to the front end. Okay. Now, what if I don't want to call, what if I don't want to have to keep writing EJS over and over again? Okay. Well, let's see here. What you can do is there's a property, I'm pretty sure it's called app.engine, express. Okay. Oh no, that's a whole other story. That's if you want to create your own custom engine. I think it's like app.set view engine. That sounds about right. Here we go. Yep. Okay, and then we're gonna run this line here. So again, if I want to, so what I would do is I would say set view engine, and then what I can do is I can say, hey, app.set, and then you're gonna say there's a bunch of different properties you can set that are part of Express. We want to set the view engine property that has a space, and we're going to set it to EJS. And what that just means it's going to assume the file extension of EJS going forward. So now I don't need this anymore. I can just say first. Okay. Oh, there's an error. So I'll go find out what the error is. Cannot access app before initialization. Oops, yeah, I put this above where we created that variable. So let's fix that. Okay. But you see, it still works, even though I took out the extension. So that's the benefit of this line here. It just allows you to not have to write the .EJS afterwards. But again, without without it, everything can work just fine. That's the beauty of, like, if you know how Express works, you can lean into it and avoid having to write extra code if you don't need to. I mean, sure, it's nice not to write file extensions, but it's just an extra line of code. Another thing you can do if you wanted to change the view folder. Okay, let me just get to the list of like app.set settings. App.set express. Okay. This is, I don't think what I was looking for. Okay, let's go here. App.set, inflate, reviver, type, verify. Those aren't what I'm looking for. Where is express.set? Control F, set, app.set. Lots. It's M. They're in alphabetical order, so should be. There we go. App.set. Okay, env, JSON, pxk. Here are all the different settings you can set. And I want to look for like view folder. Here we go. Views. Here we go. So this is where you would say the folder. So if you wanted to like specify a different folder other than this views folder to be where it looks for those files, this is the setting you would change. So it would be like app.set view, and then here you'd have to pass the full path of the folder. I would never do that. Just keep it as views. Cool. Okay, a couple other cool things you can do is, you could change, if I remember right, it's like is it app.locals? App.locals. Yep. So with this app.locals object, you could assign properties to it, and they become available to your templates. So if I were to sit here and say like app.locals.cheese equals Gouda, okay, I should be able to now use that in all my templates. So I can write here and say cheese, and that should work. And see, there it is. So in that case, if there's certain values that you don't have to specify for every route, because you're going to be using them all the time, then you can make them global by using the locals. So essentially, you can refer to any variable that's either in this app.locals object, or in the object you pass with the res.render function. Okay, essentially, those are the variables that become available to your template. And you can pass any kind of variable you want, not just strings and numbers and arrays. You can pass functions. So if you want to pass like special functions to use in your template, you can pass them down in variables. You can use inbuilt JavaScript functions in the template. Literally any valid JavaScript is going to work. Okay, it's just that anything in that object and in that app.locals object will be in scope, so you can use anything that's beyond sort of just standard JavaScript. So it literally allows you to programmatically think through your pages. Yeah. So it's all about your imagination, but you can use it to dynamically generate pages on the fly. So that way, every time someone visits a page, maybe there's certain situations where it may look a little different. But now, what if you want to attach like a JavaScript file or a CSS file? You would just do it like normal. You'd want to set up a static file server. So we'd set up static file serving. So we would do like app.use, and then we do like express.static. Again, this is not a Express lesson. And then we decide on a folder name. We're going to say public will be the name of the folder. That's usually what you'll see. And then you can put like inside that public folder, you could put like a styles.css. Okay. And now I can refer to that in my head.ejs. I can do like, okay, I want to link to that CSS file. And I can just say, hey, /styles.css. Because essentially that public folder, the way I wrote it out, /styles would basically refer to a route. Because now basically that public folder is going to be mapped to URLs through static route matching, which means like any file that's in that top level of the public folder is like slash file name, and if slash, like if I had a folder called CSS, so let's say I put that in a folder called CSS, new folder CSS, and then I put that styles in the CSS folder, the URL would be slash CSS slash styles.css. Then notice I'm not putting like a dot here or anything like that because this is not a file path. This is a URL. I'm giving it a relative URL path that my server will understand because I use that static middleware. But now that CSS will become available, so now I can like style that light class. So light, we're gonna just say background color yellow, just so that way you can see it. Oh, it's because it's static folder. So let me get rid of this index.html that's in here because that's superseding. Okay, and you can see that now that CSS file is being accessed. So if you wanted to use like a CSS or a JavaScript file, you would just set up that static server, which is this line of code here, and then in a folder that matches that whatever name you pass here, you would just put the files and reference them. Okay, and again, those references would be relative. So you wouldn't put the word public in my case because public is assumed. Basically, you're putting the path past that. Okay, yeah, that's a pretty heavy dollop in the things you can do with EJS. My name is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev. Make sure you subscribe, like, leave a comment. Have a great day and enjoy.